Well, this is January 4th in our one-year journey of reading through the Bible together. We had a little longer passage in Genesis, a little shorter passage in Matthew, some Psalms and Proverbs. It amazes me how when you read the Bible all together, and the reason we read a little bit of Old Testament, New Testament, Psalms and Proverbs each day is that each part brings out something very new and very different in our lives. I'll be tweeting you some beautiful things out of Psalms today and Proverbs and Matthew. And there's so much I could teach you out of our passage from Genesis today. But instead of going into all the heavy theology, can I just give you what I would consider, it's not an irrelevant thought, but it's one of those thoughts that I'm not necessarily sure that it's necessary to get to heaven, but it was just a really cool thing that I just noticed for the very first time as I was reading through this time in Genesis. I want to talk to you about the animals. Yeah, that's right. The animals, the birds, the fish. For just a minute, just summarize everything God has taught us thus far about the animals. I want you to notice in chapter 2, verse 7, in chapter 6, verse 17, and in chapter 1, verse 30, it said that God put the breath of lives into animals. The same breath of life He put into us, God put the breath of life into the animals. I want you to notice that the animals have two types. In chapter 8, verse 1 and chapter 9, verse 10, they're called wild stock, and they're called, or wild animals, and they're called livestock. So we have domesticated and we have wild animals. We see in chapter 9, verse 3, that God gives all the animals to man for food. So for people to say that we should only be vegetarians as a Christian, that's not true, because God gave us all the animals for food in chapter 9, verse 3. But I also want you to notice that God requires an accounting from the animals. That's right, chapter 9, verse 5. God holds the animals accountable for their actions. Now that's a very interesting thought. So go back and underline that passage. And then I want you to also notice that when God made the covenant with Noah, God made the covenant with Noah, his sons, his descendants, and all the animals that were with him. That's right. God made a covenant with the livestock and the wild animals. Chapter 8, verse 1, chapter 9, verse 9 and 10, verse 12, verse 15, verse 17, and chapter 8, verse 21. And one last little cute thought. There's a reason that animals fear man. Chapter 9, verse 2, God put the dread of man in all the animals. That's why even wild animals back up from man, because God put the fear of man in all the animals. Now I want you to go back and think about some of that a little bit today, because sometimes as the crown of God's creation, maybe we're a little arrogant about the environment, and maybe we're a little arrogant about the rest of the animals that God populated this world with. And maybe we need to recognize that God feeds them, God provides for them, God watches over them, God holds them accountable, and God has a covenant also with the animals. Just a little thought to get you thinking today.